Did you know chemicals are being used to control weeds on school grounds, parks, community centers, sidewalks, streets, soccer fields, baseball diamonds, and even track and field tracks that our kids play on? And here's the thing, these toxic chemicals are being linked to major health issues like cancer, lymphoma, ASD, ADHD, gut problems, allergies, and that's just a short list of what they're being connected to. The exciting part is we don't have to be using these toxic chemicals to control weeds and for our landscape management. We can actually use organic regenerative practices that create lush, beautiful environments that are safe for our children to play in. I'm really excited to sit down with Kim Konte, founder of Non-Toxic Neighborhoods, and Bruce Lanphear, an MD and professor at Simon Fraser University in Health Sciences. These two are powerhouses. They are super committed to creating safe environments for our children to play and grow up in. So enjoy this conversation. We dive deep into the consequences of continuing to use these chemicals and the possibilities of health and rejuvenation and regeneration when we turn towards using organic land management practices. I'm Natalie Forstbauer, founder and editor-in-chief of Heart and Soul magazine. Enjoy the conversation. And if you haven't picked up a subscription yet, head on over to heartandsoulmagazine.com. And for just $39.99 a year, you get a full year's subscription. Kim and Bruce, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you here.
Great.
Thank you for having us, Natalie.
Yeah. So I'm really curious, how did Non-Toxic Neighborhoods meet up with you, Bruce? How did you and Kim meet?
Well, I think it was 2015. I believe it was an email, and Kim reached out to me and said that, they had been worried about how pesticides were being used in the community, particularly on sports fields and playgrounds and public places where children play. And they sort of intuitively knew this was wrong. And so they started to work together. But I think there were still some questions that they had. Was their concerns, were their concerns really valid? And so then they saw our video that we put together about how toxic chemicals impact children's brain development. And so that gave them, I think, the credibility and ammunition they needed to say, absolutely, we're right. And they just plowed right on ahead. Is that right, Kim?
Yes. And we also wanted to seek your permission to put it on our website and use it in our materials. And I think the little things matter video was the glue that brought us all together, and it beautifully illustrates the accumulative impacts and the body burden on a child. And it's that kind of woke moment where you can't see that video and not really understand all of the different exposures that happen to our child just in one day and what those impacts are. So Bruce was great, and Bruce being up in Canada actually put us in touch with Dean Baker at UCI, and we've kind of just been so grateful for the advisors that donate their time, that submit letters in support of important items and legislation. So thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I was so excited and curious about how you met, because I wanted that backstory that we haven't really dove into what exactly NTN stands for, Non-Toxic Neighborhoods. So Kim, can you tell us more about what Non-Toxic Neighborhoods is, and what inspired that to be birthed? How did that come to be, and why it's so important?
Well, our business plan per Bruce Lanphear is that we will be out of business in 10 years, but there'll be no need for our help. What we are trying to do for everyone is make sure they don't have to recreate the wheel. So back in 2015, when we started working with Bruce on this effort in our city in Irvine, California, in our school district, our goal was to get organic and regenerative land management policies online to protect our children from exposure to these synthetic pesticides. And in 2016, we were successful in doing that. We didn't know what we were doing. I mean, it was a lot of trial and error. I think a lot of people don't know that their elected officials are accessible until there's an issue that means enough to them that they seek them out. And that's what we did. And we learned that a lot of the elected officials were simply unaware that it's common practice to utilize Roundup on sidewalks and trails and in parks to chemically burn tree wells and hardscapes and garden beds. And then to find out that it's also very common practice to utilize 2,4-D, which is 50% of what makes up Agent Orange, directly on the turf to kill broadleaf weed pressure. When, again, we've learned that when you focus on soil health, it naturally chokes out a majority of the weed pressure. So we were able to get this policy online. We went organic by neglect. We had to get products registered in the state of California for a city to utilize. And what's beautiful about Irvine's policy is that we organically maintain all pest pressure to avoid the game of pesticide whack-a-mole. Because if you're only looking to switch to organic management with weeds, then you still have to worry about what are they using to control rodents, you know, any vector-related disease, fumigants. So we wanted to create the healthiest environment possible for our children to be able to thrive. And Jane Goodall, we found out on April 1st, April Fool's Day, that she put out a quote in support of our work, and we had no idea the impact that that would have. So the following week, we are contacted by families, pet owners, just people wanting to rid their communities of these toxins. Worldwide, we now have non-toxic neighborhood teams in Australia and New Zealand, in Malta. We can all go visit Malta. Beautiful. So, with that, the goal was to just then put all of what we learned into an organic toolbox. So if it's a parent wanting to start their dialogue with a principal, there's a letter, there's supporting research that, again, our advisors were so critical to our success because they lent us, you know, the credibility that they have, you know, and with their backgrounds, and they helped us vet research. You know, we don't blame every issue on glyphosate because unfortunately there's enough peer-reviewed, vetted, sound science that shows that this toxin should have been never utilized, especially for cosmetic purposes. So that's what we do. We've helped over 200 cities, counties, and school districts nationally. And just last year, we helped draft the first glyphosate ban, statewide ban in New York. And that's not enough. I mean, just banning one active ingredient doesn't equate to actually improving public health and safety, because they'll just go to another non-selective. We're working with them just to not go from one synthetic to another, but at least it creates awareness that our regulatory system is broken. And until it's fixed, we have to be vigilant.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, Kim. And I just want to really help people understand what we're talking about, because what amazed me when I was working in our own city of Chilliwack, when I was living there, was there were teachers in the school who ate organically, who were really mindful about how weed management happened and stuff like that. And I was taking pictures at one of the schools, and they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just taking these pictures because there's glyphosate that's being used along the fence lines and along the buildings to kill the weeds." And she was shocked. She had no idea that that was happening. She's like, "I've worked in this district for, you know, X amount of years, and you're telling me that they're actually spraying weed killer on our playgrounds?" And I of course said, "Yeah, they are." And I said, and I showed her, and she said, "I had no idea." She said, "I thought the grass was just dead there." And so this is what we're talking about, is where and how it's being used. And another piece that was really shocking to me was when we were doing our research, is that the whole entire track that was used for the children's track meet was sprayed just days before the children were going to go and have this massive track meet on it. And not just around the track and, you know, where all the different places, but even the sandbox was sprayed to make sure that it was mitigating and killing the weeds. So this is what we're talking about with the work that you're doing with non-toxic neighborhood, is stopping the use of those chemicals that we're often not even aware that they're using. And like walking down the sidewalk, like you said, with the grass growing between the cracks, people don't like to see that because doesn't look cosmetically pretty. And the way that is often controlled is through these herbicides and pesticides.
And that's, Natalie, that's actually how I fell into this. We moved from Bermuda, where they banned Roundup because of its potential negative health impacts. Moving to California, I thought everything's organic, everybody surfs. So then when my son's elementary school was using Roundup, just as you said, to mark the track, to show the children where to run in a circle, that was how we kind of fell into this. And I think one huge piece that we didn't have back then that we have now is that there are labs like Great Plain Labs. So pediatricians are now, if they're seeing developmental delays, they're ordering this lab work to see if our children's systems are impacted. And this little 4-year-old girl in Orange, California, who unfortunately, Orange is still using copious amounts of Roundup and a lot of other synthetic toxins. 4 years old, she was at the 95th percentile of glyphosate in her system, and she was off the charts with 2,4-D in her system at 4 years old. And her parents had trouble, getting pregnant, so they had her on a strict organic diet. These toxins in her system were a result of her playing in a city park, and we pulled the pesticide use reports, and glyphosate and 2,4-D were applied multiple times throughout the year. So just being a kid, running in the grass, playing in the grass, collecting sticks, that's what, as parents, it's good for children. But again, it's important to find out how your city parks and the green space where they're playing is maintained.
Yeah, it used to be, I used to not mind if my kids dropped something on the ground, like an apple or something, and picked up and ate it. I'd be like, it's totally okay. But now I'm like, don't eat it, because I don't know when it was last sprayed with chemicals or toxins. And it's funny how I'm feeling that way, whereas before I was like, yeah, germs, it's okay.
Well, normally, soil is good for you, as long, I want the kids to roll around in dirt and play in the soil, as long as we know that it's free of synthetic pesticides.
Yeah, 100%. So Bruce, I'm really curious what the impact of all these chemicals are having on our children, because you are an MD, you teach health sciences at Simon Fraser University, and you've seen the impact of chemicals on all ages of humanity. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your story and how you woke up to this noticing.
Yeah. Well, the first thing to recognize is that the way these pesticides and other toxic chemicals are first allowed to be used, it's without adequate testing. Yeah, they probably have 1 or 2 laboratory studies that show that a small percent of rodents get sick at high doses, and then they make some safety adjustment and say, well, it's safe at this level for humans, but we really don't know. And so people who have, who focus on neurotoxicity of these chemicals, basically what we're doing is, after there's been widespread exposure to everything from plastics like phthalates and bisphenol A, or pesticides, or heavy metals like lead and arsenic, after there's been widespread exposure to children and pregnant women, we go out and we study it. And then invariably we're finding that they're toxic, and they're toxic at levels previously thought to be safe. And so that's the system we have. These chemicals are assumed to be innocent until proven time and again to be toxic. And it's not like one study is enough. You have to have multiple studies, both in the laboratory and in humans. And I say multiple, probably dozens, if not hundreds, before we actually regulate these things. So that's the system that's been set up to, quote, protect us. And of course, it isn't protecting us, because by default, what it means is millions, if not billions of people have been exposed to these chemicals before they're shown to be toxic, because we're only studying them after they've been used. So I first got involved in this focusing mostly on lead. So it's about 25 years ago. That was the big chemical of concern at the time, along with mercury and PCBs, but not many others in children. And so we first started to look at this. And for me, it was, I'd really like to just eliminate poverty, because that would solve half of our problems, right? Half of the diseases that we all struggle with would just go away if we could really eliminate poverty. And we can, it's a man-made disease. But that was a bit overwhelming for me to tackle. So I thought if I could at least help protect kids from lead poisoning, I could at least help to remove that hurdle from them doing good in society, right? Thriving. So I spent about a decade really focusing on lead. But then it became clear that by the way we studied lead, we could also look at pregnant women and their children's exposures to tobacco, to phthalates and bisphenol A, to organophosphate pesticides and pyrethroids and all these other things, because it's become possible now to measure that. And so these are really sort of like the second generation studies where we can take advantage of, if we're going to ask questions about one toxic chemical, we can look at dozens at the same time. And that's really where we are now. And even though maybe, 25 years ago, there were 2 or 3 chemicals that we really worried about for children, now there's probably at least a dozen that have all been shown very consistently to be toxic to developing children.
Bruce, can you share also, I think what was really eye-opening is, and I think it's a positive trait that we're trusting, and we trust that if the school district is utilizing something or a city is utilizing something, it's proven safe to do so. So when we learned about the EPA and the fact that they don't even test the inert ingredients and the impacts of the active ingredient, and they're allocating signal words, when we're working with municipalities, a lot of them bring up the signal words, caution, warning, danger, as what equates to public health and safety. But with glyphosate, dicamba, and diquat, for example, they all have a yellow caution label, and that's just based on LD50 and not the true toxicity of the product. That's why I don't know how these products go to market, because to Bruce's point, we're basically the guinea pigs. Like DDT, and now we're living through chlorpyrifos and glyphosate being removed and from lawn and garden stores. They're still Bayer Crop Sciences still plans on selling Roundup. They're just removing and playing whack-a-mole with the active ingredient.
Yeah, well, and it's clear that the regulatory system is flawed. And it's easy to point our finger at EPA and blame them for failing to protect us, and they deserve some of that.
Yeah, can you just name what EPA is for everybody?
The Environmental Protection Agency. So around the world, a number of environmental protection agencies have sort of blossomed, beginning mostly around the 1970s. Before that, the word environment really didn't come into play up until Rachel Carson wrote the book Silent Spring. So that really began to wake us up to this idea. So it's easy to blame the EPA, and whether it's in Canada or the United States or elsewhere, because they are failing to protect us. But whenever we blame them, political leaders will reduce their budget. So what we have to do is both hold them accountable and that demand they have a stronger mandate to protect us and give them more resources. So it's really this sort of an interesting position to be in. And 99 out of 100 people I've worked with at EPA or Health Canada, they're trying to do the right thing. They're good people trying to do the right thing, but they don't have the mandate, they don't have the resources, and they don't really have the support, whether it's public support or political support, because most of us don't really appreciate how much these toxic chemicals contribute to some of the leading causes of death, disease, and disability today. We focus on other things. We focus on providing better medical care, on genetics. All of that is fine, except intentionally or inadvertently, what it does is it underemphasizes the importance of these toxic chemicals.
And prevention, Bruce, I think.
And prevention, absolutely.
Right, right. Because it's like it's almost like the silent killer or the silent sickness in our community, because we are linking so much disease and illness to other things, that one of the largest contributors that is in our food and in our systems every single day is quiet. And I think it's so powerful to have this conversation with you and link the two, and link because it amazes me how often I see families actually spraying their yards and spraying their driveways with something like Roundup, for example, to kill the weeds. And then minutes later, their kids are playing on it. Like they actually have no idea how linked the chemicals are to the illness and the disease that we're seeing in the world.
And I think, it's not a surprise, right? These are, if you can buy it on the market, buy it on the shelves, why would it be poison? They wouldn't be selling us a poison, would they? And so I think that's the impression. Even if you read in the fine print, don't play on your grass for such and such hours. Just because you can buy it on the market, I think people think it's safe. The other thing is that, this is now 60 years old, this idea that we're going to improve our lives through chemistry. And, we tend to dismiss that, but that's still an underlying belief that many of us hold. We're going to improve our lives through chemistry and better technology. And so that belief still drives a lot of our own beliefs about the safety of technologies, the safety of chemicals. And we don't even think that, we have choices. Some technology absolutely is a wonderful gift. A lot of technology, not so much, especially when it blinds us from opportunities to actually prevent disease, for example.
Man, that's really powerful, Bruce. And what would you say is a shift that we need to shift from the connection of looking for advancement from chemistry and technology? Where might we need to be looking that we haven't been looking?
Well, I think so. One of the areas is to recognize that some technologies are more destructive than others, right? So the bicycle is probably one of the best technologies out there, but we allow the auto industry to convince us that we should focus more on building roads for cars as opposed to building bike paths or places to walk in the city. And so we've allowed dominant, powerful industries that have a vested interest to drive the process rather than stepping back and having a more balanced view. I mean, motor vehicles have a place. We're going to have to shift away from fossil fuels, of course. There'll be new questions with electric cars as well, but we need to be much more thoughtful about what technologies we adopt. The other thing is that we continually promote innovative technologies, but we aren't as willing to accept innovative social policies. So, for example, if we weren't afraid of social innovations, we could eliminate poverty tomorrow in the United States, in Canada, around the world, right? This is a man-made problem. It's a problem of distribution of resources, not that there's not enough. But we're afraid of social innovations because they upset the social order. And that's where you get into trouble trying to bring about social innovations.
And what about the chemistry piece? And what's the shift that needs to happen there?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to look at what we learned about drugs, right? Up until the 1960s, when the thalidomide crisis happened, there were no good laws that really provided requirements of safety of drugs or proof of efficacy of drugs. Not that there hadn't been attempts to better regulate them. There had been for over 5 decades, but the industry kept pushing back. until the thalidomide crisis happened, and it could no longer be ignored. So the thalidomide crisis, actually, it was a Canadian physician who delayed approval in the United States. So the epidemic of phocomelia, of the children being born without limbs or with shortened
Right.
limbs, was less of a problem in the United States because of Francis Kelsey. The rates were higher in Canada and Germany and Australia. So that crisis forced us to develop regulations around drugs, that they had to be proven safe and efficacious before they were marketed. That's not true for environmental chemicals. And yet what you can see is that the levels of these environmental chemicals circulated in pregnant women and children's blood are comparable with the level of drugs that are shown to be efficacious, right? So there's no reason we shouldn't think about environmental chemicals as potentially as toxic as drugs, but we haven't actually achieved that yet.
Okay,
Because how
so
can we get just when you look at the precautionary principle, it's something that we're really missing in the States. And I think through the regulatory system, and again, that they're not testing the inert ingredients, that until reform happens, I don't see any other solution than approaching it through working at the grassroots level.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Kim. And I love the agency that it brings into the conversation about working at the grassroots level, because often we're taught to go outward for results, right? We're taught to go outward for how do I look, or we're taught to go outward for does this look okay, or does this working for you? And the grassroots invites us to go inward to what can I do? What agency do I have? What's important to me? What is actually happening in my environment around me. And so I really deeply appreciate the work of Non-Toxic Neighborhoods and all your advisors in helping people identify and name the, I will say, atrocity that's happening with the way that we manage the pests and the weeds in our communities, and also give agency and hope and tools and resources and all the really, really good things that Non-Toxic Neighborhoods brings for people to create the shift. So can you talk to us and tell us a little bit about, about what is possible and the difference that it does make for, like, why would somebody want to transition, to organic and regenerative land management? Because really the parks and the cities look really nice when they are managed with chemicals. And that's what people are really looking for and used to. And so I'm wondering what the successes has been for the communities that have transitioned, and so aesthetically and also health-wise, and what agency does that have for parents? Because a lot of parents don't think about if there's chemicals on the ground or not, because it's not something that's ever really crossed their mind before.
Right. And I think that's what we wanted to focus on, is once the pesticide applicator leaves the site, the actual toxins are invisible, but their impacts are not. We're seeing them in our children. And I think the proof of concept has been critical in our success. The fact that we were able to transition the city of Irvine, and the turf conditions improved, the plant health improved, because we broke the addiction to these synthetic toxins and inputs, and then we're allowing the soil to work as a system with the roots. And it, again, even going organic by neglect in the beginning, other than the weed seed beds expanding, there were benefits right away. Like if you're chemically applying Roundup to every tree, then that tree is dealing with so much more against itself from an immunity standpoint, because we have research that glyphosate can have up to a 22-year half-life in the soil. So in Irvine and other cities that we've had organic policies online, the trees are healthier. They're able to fight off pest pressure. So now we're working with UC Davis to actually study this and to be able to prove this, to again, get other cities excited. There's no downside of breaking the system. And when Stonyfield Organic Yogurt, the nice folks up in New Hampshire making organic yogurt, found out what we were doing, they really helped us because we were able to show proof of concept in California, but then we went to North Miami. So regardless of climate, regardless of soil conditions, we're able to show that when you focus on building soil health, everything else falls into place. And then your turf is not dependent on these toxins. Your weed pressure decreases, because when you're using these non-selective and selective pesticides constantly, it's making the soil compact and it's making and increasing weed pressure. So it's a brilliant business model on the chemical industry side, but you know, as far as protecting our children and our soil and our pets and our watersheds, I think that's why Florida has been so active. We have so many teams and successes in there with all the red tides. I mean, we're just, the balance is just so impacting just nature and everything living. I mean, even our sea cows and our manatees, you know, they 58% of all of the manatees that were just tested have glyphosate in their plasma. You know, we're killing the seagrass. It's just like, but all of this is heavy stuff. But the good news is that, you know, we've proven that you follow these simple steps, and we've been the only 2 cities that have not yet adopted organic and regenerative management that we've worked with since 2016 is Orange, California, and Newport Beach, California. Sarasota, Florida used to be one of the 3, and even Sarasota banned glyphosate, and they're working on it. And they see the importance with all the red tides and the loss that they're, you know, is impacting Florida as a state from tourism. You know, if you remove the ocean out of the equation in Florida, there's not many reasons. You know, it definitely hurts the state financially.
It does. Yeah, it really does. And I love how you're connecting. I mean, it hurts to connect the chemicals to the impact on the water and on the oceans. And at the same time, it's such an important conversation because I don't think we understand fully globally the impact that our agrochemicals and our the chemicals that we're using on our streets and on our schoolyards and in the playgrounds are having on the water and the mammals in the water. So I really appreciate you connecting those two, because there's so many lakes that are unswimmable. There's rivers that you know, you can't drink the water from anymore. There's oceans with, like you said, lots of wild mammals just dying. There's birds that are not making it anymore. And to connect them to chemicals is
it's the insect apocalypse. It's just, you know, remember when you go on road trips with your family and there would be 10 bugs on your windshield? It doesn't happen anymore.
No.
Spare the bugs. We need our bugs. And then, but the good news is there's so many solutions. One important key point that we recently learned is that when we think we're having this positive impact and protecting children in the parks and decreasing toxins and ending up in the watersheds, is in San Diego, 98% of their total glyphosate use is utilized in roadside vegetation management. So that became a big shift for us, but it's a very positive one, because when you switch from regular roadside vegetation management, which is high frequency mowing and then broadcast applications of glyphosate, you'll see it on highways, you'll see either the green dye or the chemical orange burn. You replace that with planting native plants that then support your pollinators. It's right off the top 30% cheaper. You know, this is a 2-year study done in Florida by DOT. And then on top of that, it protects your natives, your pollinators, but it increased yields for the farmers. So, I mean, it's like,
right. It's
win-win.
really powerful.
Really powerful.
So we just have to focus on all of the solutions out there, and we have the tools to make sure that you can, you know, begin the dialogue with your municipality and discuss roadside vegetation management, discuss how the parks are managed, and just provide solutions. We're very solutions-based. We don't make signs, we're not angry. All of the park staff, everybody's wants to maintain aesthetics. They're doing their job, and they've been educated that chemicals are the solution for any pest pressure issue, when we just prove to them in proof of concept that they're not.
Yeah, I love what you just named there, because it can be positive, and people actually do really get excited about it when they start to see the different ways to do something. Because sometimes people see it as added work, because organic and regenerative land management, that means you have to do more weeding, that means you have to do more like hands-on dirty work, and that the fact that you just named that you can actually plant native plants, and it increases pollinators, and it actually reduces the amount of landscaping that needs to be done, because the native plants just naturally grow to the size that they're meant to be. They flower the way they're meant to flower, and they at the end of the season they break down and they go back into your earth, and they regenerate it in new ways there too. And the other piece that is really exciting is that people feel like there's actually hope, and they are making a difference when they are making a difference. Yeah. Bruce, can you tell us a little bit about I guess the language that's being used around the chemicals to help give us a better idea of what regrettable substitution is? So what I mean by that is recently, here's the thing. There's been a lot of information about glyphosate, right? It's been in the news. It's been, there's litigation that has been brought out against it. And so more people are familiar with it. And now Bayer is saying, we're going to take it out of all, how do you say, home?
Lawn and garden.
Thank you, lawn and garden use. And which is great. And at the same time, what does that really mean?
Yeah, well, there's been a long history of regrettable substitution, including different types of toxic chemicals have been used. Early on, lead arsenate was used as an insecticide, and then that was discontinued because it was shown to be toxic. And then it was replaced by DDT, and then that was shown to be toxic. And so they shifted to organophosphate pesticides, and that had some value because they weren't long lasting. They weren't persistent pollutants or persistent chemicals, but now we know that those are toxic. And so they're being replaced by pyrethroids and neonics and glyphosate for herbicides, and atrazine was used. And invariably what we're going to find is that these chemicals, which are biologically active, are toxic to living things. What Rachel Carson warned us about back in 1962 about resistance is also true, universally true. Whether it's antibiotics, if you overuse them, you're going to develop microbe resistance. We're going to lose options to treat people with infections if we use them too much in the cattle industry, for example. And there's been growing resistance to things like glyphosate. And so they've started to use combination herbicides, which now are causing problems on farms. And they're running out of herbicides, and resistance is inevitable. It's just the way it works. So this idea of regrettable substitution is we're basically putting a chemical out there, finding it's toxic, replacing it with another chemical that has less information, showing it's toxic, repeat, repeat, repeat. And of course, in the process, there's lots of disease, lots of problems that happen, whether it's for farmers, for families, for public health. It just doesn't work anymore.
Right. And something that really was eye-opening and awakening for myself is when I learned that cide, actually means to kill. So herbicide, fungicide, pesticide, it means to kill. So I think keeping that in mind when we're looking at all these new items that are coming out, when they end inside, it means they're killing something. And if they're killing something in their environment, that means they're impacting us, because you can't wash chemicals off of a food. You can't like hose chemicals off of the driveway or off of the track after they've been sprayed.
Right. And even when you find something that doesn't have a pathway in the human body, if it's sidal to organisms in the soil, it will ultimately have a detrimental impact on soil health. and ultimately on human health. You just can't get away from it. And to me, one of the most important lessons, which is where I think we can learn from indigenous communities, is that evolution has, centuries and centuries of wisdom to teach us. And natural systems, ecosystems evolved to maintain a balance. And we've upset the balance, and we, in our arrogance, think we can do better. And what we're finding is that that's not true.
And to the point with the side, ultimately we want to get away from even using organic pesticides. And one thing that's really important is the greenwashing happening right now is out of control. I mean, we have products on the market that claim to be organic and they are not. So the goal is to move away from all pesticides, including organic pesticides. But if you are a municipality, you are tasked to clear miles of fence line, you can make sure that they're OMRI listed without exception and Washington State Department of Ag certified, because they will check the sources. They will make sure that there are no Prop 65 carcinogenic sources in that product. But again, the goal is to move away from all the sides, and we're utilizing holistic plant grazing to remediate soil, to remove PFAS. We're utilizing targeted goat grazing for removing poison ivy. We have new technology that farmers can utilize. We had a great meeting with Rodale and the Little Robot Company. So, I mean, just all of these tools where we can control weeds and pest pressure without using any chemicals, including organic pesticides, is the ultimate goal. And technology is finally increasing. So you go old school with the holistic, grazing of the cattle to, root wave that systemically kills the weed through technology and no chemicals.
Yeah, I love that you named that too, Kim, because I remember I grew up in a certified organic and biodynamic farm, and we didn't use any organic pesticides or anything like that either. And my mom, I think, was interviewed on a documentary, and she talked about that. And they interviewed other organic farmers who were using these other organic inputs, and it caused a lot of friction in the organic community that we were in, because my parents weren't saying that it was wrong. They just said that they prefer not to use it because they felt like they still had the similar and same end game as a chemical pesticide. So even though they're safer, it's still attacking the nervous system of a bug, for example, and killing it. So and at the same time, I think that the move away from a chemical usage, I think, is really the first step that we need to take. And when we can make that step and then build upon that and go into more regenerative organic, so we're absolutely not using any pesticides at all, is the most powerful. And one of the things I love about non-toxic neighborhoods is you really meet a community where they're at. And so you're not going in and saying, these are all the things you're doing wrong, but it's like, here are some things that we can actually do differently. So it's not adding to, it's actually just rethinking and redefining how we can look after our parks and look after our schools and look after our roadways and even our golf courses, right?
Yeah. And the community building aspect's been beautiful too. And Burbank, they have a program called DIG, and that was consistent through COVID. And with COVID, I think the upside has been, it really put a sharp spotlight on how our overall health and well-being is directly connected to our green space and our parks. And that, we need to clean them up and make them as safe as possible.
Yeah, it's true. And tell me a little bit about DIG. What is that?
Oh, sorry. I need more coffee, organic coffee. So DIG is this program where the residents select parks, and it's like an adopt a park program. And we now have it in Safety Harbor, Florida, all these other places is popping up, because it's connecting the community with the Parks Department. Because before Burbank, we worked with Burbank to adopt an organic policy. Before this happened, the community was upset about the toxins in the parks. The parks department's just trying to keep the city manager and elected officials happy. So when the policy went forward, they worked together. And I remember the parks director called me. He's like, I just got cookies. It flipped from kind of this, relationship where the community is frustrated and concerned, rightfully so, about the toxins, and the parks department is just trying to do their job.
Yes.
So when the policy comes forward, the community came together. There's, even during COVID, they had food trucks come out. They support local businesses. They have music in the parks, and then they give prizes to the children who remove the weeds properly. We don't want to create additional weed pressure. So that it's been amazing. It's
so
the community
powerful.
helping the parks department, and also educating the community, where Burbank went out and sent, if you see a dandelion, it's because we are working to protect our pollinators and our residents. And it's really been so positive, and it increases property value. So it's a no-brainer. I mean, I think the biggest roadblock we're finding, and I shared this with Bruce this week, is that we found out Bear Crop Sciences is now targeting the cities that we're working with. So any city that makes a commitment to move towards organic regenerative management, they're now targeting them and trying to make donations and have these greenwashing events. So we just really have to work to support our city staff, and the community is critical in that. And we give everyone the tools, and it's been, again, really positive. It's something that anyone can do.
Yes, anyone, and really literally anyone can do it. And you just said something there. Let me see if I can recapture that. And that was that our leadership is really doing the best they can with what they know. And the messaging that they are having and that they've experienced is that the chemicals they're using are safe in the amount that they're using them. So that's something really to be mindful of when we're going in and having conversations with our leadership, and having agency in showing them new ways. And I'm really curious, Kim, can you just really walk us through if I'm in a city and I find out that chemicals are being used for land management, what would be my first steps, and where would I even start?
Sure. So first, we would give you our organic toolkit. We'd find out, Natalie, do you want to work on pesticide reduction, with your city, with your school district, with your neighbor, and then we provide those tools. So say you want to work with your city, we would pull a pesticide usage report from the city, not to shame them, not to call them out for using these toxins, but to find out what they're using. So then we can share what solutions they can switch to, proven examples. Working with our golf courses, for example, there are no organic selectives in the world, right? So that's a pesticide that you would use on the turf. So what we were able to do is finally take an organic non-selective, and through a weed wand, you could take care of goosegrass and everything else. So it's just bringing the solutions to your city. So you would have a meeting with your city staff, and just a very friendly meeting to kind of see where they are. We like to gauge their knowledge, and if their arms are crossed and they're not happy about this entire meeting, and we'll work. I mean, it just means it's probably going to be a little bit longer of a journey to the end, but persistence, we're not going to give up on Orange, California, and Newport Beach, because everyone eventually, sees the benefit,
So
even
true.
if it's a very red state. Bruce helped us get an advisor to join us on a call with a senator, and Idaho. No, where were we? It was Idaho.
Idaho.
Bruce is like, it's like the Mississippi of the North. Good luck, Kim. But thanks to the expert that you had join the call, we had a meeting with a senator, and he has 28 grandkids. Like it connected with him. So you just gotta work and find out, do they care about their pet? Do they care about their grandchildren, their children? And there's some angle that you can always share the benefits of moving away from poison.
Yeah. And connecting it to kids and pets is always super, super powerful.
And that's what we need Bruce's help for, with, bringing about children's environmental rights, because if we get it right for the kids, right, then we get it right for everything else. It's just the body burden of them, because they're not fully developed, is is, when they do the test, it's LD50, and we're not factoring in how it's impacting the most vulnerable populations.
Mm. And what does that mean, environmental protection for the kids?
Bruce, do you want to share?
Well, I mean, if you pay attention to the newest science, what that means is we should literally be trying to achieve 0 levels of exposures to heavy metals, toxic metals like lead and mercury and arsenic, to airborne pollutants, to pesticides, to flame retardants, chemical flame retardants. What we were taught 30 years ago is that low levels of chemicals are safe or innocuous. But what we've learned over the past 20 to 30 years is that's not true. It was a reasonable assumption, but it was an assumption. And actually, it wasn't even just an assumption. There was a concerted effort to find ways to make it acceptable. And that, in fact, was the regulatory language used, that these are acceptable risks. An acceptable number of people will develop cancer. An acceptable number of children will be harmed. But acceptable to whom?
Right.
Well, it was acceptable at the time to political leaders, to industry. Nobody asked mothers. Nobody asked the parents. And it's time that we did. We need to really democratize this process and ask people what risks they're willing to accept for the benefit of industry.
That's really powerful. I just have a couple more questions. One is, Kim, you mentioned if you want to work with your school board, or if you want to work with your city, or if you want to work with something else.
Roundup living neighbor.
Yeah, roundup living neighbor. So just because somebody like a city has it sounds like there's different levels of governance. So it just because the city has stopped using chemicals, it doesn't necessarily mean the school board will have stopped using chemicals. Is that right?
That is right. And that's the hardest part, is that, you have the municipal and what they're responsible for their city land. Then there's the private land, there's preemption. The county usually tackles vector related issues. So we work with counties to show the benefits of not using adulticides and larvicides, because they're also, they don't magically just take care of the target mosquito.
Yeah.
They also wipe out the dragonflies and everything else. They keep everything in balance, back to Bruce's point.
Yes.
So it's just so segmented that it protects industry and overuse, because they're also not talking to each other.
That's
so they're
right.
spraying almost all flood channels are controlled. They utilize aquamasters, and they use glyphosate-based pesticides that are going directly into our water system. So
That's
it's
right.
just kind of, and we can use goats. We're using goats. And
yes.
So, I mean, you can use goats in the watersheds that have less of a negative impact. We've studied it, their feces, everything. 4 ground squirrels and 1 duck, like when they, their, how do you want to say poop?
Their dung, their poop
has less
their
of
waste
impact than goats, right? The waste. So, when you have arguments from industry that will push back, and they use propaganda, they try and fear mongering with Idaho right now is trying to prevent an application of nailed, right? Didn't we learn from what happened in Miami by using that aerial application that wiped out thousands of beehives? Like, do we not see a problem with it? Why is that product still on the market? So it's just providing the solutions and, working with each group, and that's why if you want to meet with your county, there's going to be more lobbying pressure, but we've done that. So we just share with you what to share with them. And it makes elected officials look good.
Yes, it does.
Who doesn't want to save all the puppies and the kids?
Yes, so true. And there's and so if somebody wanted to start, where would they start? Or
email us and just let us know where you are, so we can let you know if if there's a chapter there, a team already working. There's definitely the numbers. Everybody's busy. And through Zoom, we'll have someone from the team join. And again, Bruce has been amazing, where if we have a meeting with a senator or someone, and we need kind of local help coming from a university that they would possibly connect with more than UCI or Mount Sinai or something like that, then it really is helpful in that process.
Okay. And if for example, if chemical use or glyphosate is banned from the city use, can I still use it in my yard?
Yes, for now.
Okay. All right.
I
So
think
how
we're
does
having a going out of sale?
So that sounds like a whole different conversation.
Yeah, that's preemption. But again, it's just education. Like our HOAs are organically maintained, and now realtors are sharing that information. So
Awesome.
if I wouldn't want to take this on all over again if I had to. So if I can select a school district that's already organically maintained, or HOA or city, then they're now kind of sharing that, which again is really helpful.
That's amazing. And tell me what you enjoy most about the work that you're doing, Kim.
I think it's just going to these parks, from New York City to California, and seeing the kids. They can do whatever how they are. Like my boys play baseball. They play baseball from, the time they could walk. And that's really kind of why we got into this. Is as a parent, I felt like I failed because I didn't protect them from, I didn't know that glyphosate was used. I didn't know that 2,4-D, I didn't know that that was common practice. So I felt like that entire time I was responsible for that exposure. So now it's just, seeing them slide in a home and seeing the brick dust and knowing that they're protected, and also at the baseball games and all the youth sports, all the siblings end up going to practice and they're playing with their Matchbox cars, and they're, so just knowing that they're safe, that there's no invisible toxins hiding that, could harm them, and that, we want to make it, we want every child to be protected, regardless of zip code, regardless of income. Environmental injustice is a big issue. And in Philadelphia, Philadelphia has been a struggle. We're working specifically with the 8th district because they are the most neglected district, and Councilwoman Bass is fighting for her residents and her community. And we saw through the pesticide usage reports that the 8th district, those children are exposed to much more harmful pesticides and toxins than other districts based on income. And that has to stop immediately.
It does. That has to stop. Man, thank you for the work that you're doing on that. And how about you, Bruce? What fills your heart about the work that you're doing? What makes it meaningful?
Well, I mean, when I started 25 or so years ago, I used to have this naive belief that if I did the science, it would be picked up by the policymakers, by the regulators. They would enact laws, people would be happy, everybody would be protected. But the truth is we don't have, we have gaps. We have the science, we have the regulators, and then there's this huge gap between them. How do you take the science? How does it get translated to actually help the public, protect children, for example? And throughout history, it's always been this way, that you need ultimately to have the community get involved and demand change. And usually it's mothers. That's where a lot of the public health first took place, and that's where it still happens. And so for me, working with non-toxic neighborhoods and other groups and watching the science get translated to actually protect people, it either takes mothers, communities demanding change, the legal system, but that's where the big gap has been. And so to see this science get picked up by communities and by groups like Non-Toxic Neighborhood, that keeps me going.
That's really powerful. And I love your video too. I can't wait to share it more with people. And what do you most want people to know about this topic?
Well, we could start out, big scope. A lot of us focus on climate change. Climate change is one of 9 planetary boundaries. We could wipe out humanity by exhausting freshwater supplies. We could do it by continuing to have problems with climate change. We could do it with toxic chemicals that we're really just beginning to understand the full impact on life. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we know these are all connected. And some of the things we've talked about today, if we can shift away from our reliance on toxic chemicals, we can improve the soil. If we rely more on regenerative agriculture and more natural processes, we can deal with many of these planetary boundaries at the same time. And it's ultimately going to take each of us contributing. First, to demand that our regulatory system changes, that the corporate system changes, but that all of us have a role. Everything we do every day has this ripple effect that adds up.
It's really powerful. And we've mentioned the soil a few times, and I just want to really embrace and take agency in the power of the soil, because so often we look above the ground and how can we fix what's happening above the ground, from above the ground. And what you're doing, what Non-Toxic Neighborhoods is really doing, is teaching how when we build our soil, when we build the health of our soil, then that actually changes the way our landscape manifests, I guess you could say, right? With the less weeds,
In our food
with
system.
more vibrance. Yes, in our
Right.
food system. It's everywhere.
Everything.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And how about you, Kim? What do you most want people to know?
Just that I think all the news, everything has been so heavy. And you know, the good news is that there are things that we can do to positively impact and help with the climate crisis. And the sixth, you know, extinction that we're facing right now is, you know, this is something you can have a very positive impact on beyond, you know, everybody's talking about greenhouse gases. This has a major impact on that. You know, when when the soil's healthy, when the turf is healthy, I mean, they become carbon sinks. I mean, and then with agriculture, you know, switching to regenerative management, just the benefits you see. I mean, even wildfire prevention, you know, in California, like we just have wildfire season. That's just the new normal. And the fact that we could benefit and help our ranchers, and in return, they're helping mitigate and prevent these catastrophic wildfires, you know, going back, indigenous, like they knew what was right, you know, and we have to go back to that. You know, only working on suppression for wildfires is 6 times more expensive than working on prevention. So instead of just throwing this money at hiring more firefighters and the toxic fire retardant that's, you know, dousing California all the time, it's just get our cattle out there to regenerate the land, heal the soil, and it totally removes the fuel load. So it's just going back to the solutions and just not being needed. I mean, 10 years I think is pretty aggressive goal, but it would be so nice that by then people have made the connection. I mean, look at it, like when we had smoking sections on planes.
Yeah.
Like what? So I want to get to the point where like we use pesticides in the parks where kids played. What? Like we want to get there. We don't want to be needed.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and what you do every day, what foods you choose to buy and cook, and what you choose to put on your lawn or not, each of those has a huge impact because it's cumulative, right? So if a billion people do this in a positive way, it has a huge impact. So everything every family does every day adds up.
Yeah, it really does. And I often have conversations with families who have never eaten organic, for example. They're eating chemically grown food and they say, you know, I can't afford it, and I get it. And at the same time, I said, when you even buy 1 pound of apples organically, and 1 million people do that, that's 1 million pounds of organic food that's being purchased. So Bruce, what you said is so true. It's all cumulative. It's just the little things we do every single day.
Voting with our spending, you know,
that's right.
That is something industry does pay attention to.
It sure does. And there's urgency. We have to do it now. We have to. It's our time to step into that, to step into those choices
And
of where we're spending money.
the children, the kids, we always encourage them to be a part of the process. We have a non-toxic neighborhood youth team. They're brilliant and way more fun to listen to than us. And they go to city council meetings. They have these experiences. They're comfortable speaking on the microphone. I mean, it's a great experience for them. It's a great way for them to learn how government works. And they're part of the solution, and they're why we're doing it. So it just reinforces why we're going to a city council meeting on a Tuesday when you have much better things to do. Taking that time, to Bruce's point, it's critical you can have a positive impact every single day. So, we do need people to show up and bring the kids.
Yeah, bring the kids. And today we're listening to kids and youth more than we ever have, which is really powerful.
They're pissed and they have every right. Yep. They're not leaving this planet, like the Amish, when they farm for 5 generations in. So they're protecting the soil. They're working because they want those generations to be protected and to be able to, have a family and thrive. And Bruce, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but I think one major point too is that these chemicals are also sterilizing the population. Men's sperm count has decreased by 50%. And that needs to be addressed. And I think if we focused on that, and actually one of the city staffers in Philadelphia is really funny. You can edit this out if you want to, but she was saying if we, marketed to men, this pesticide exposure could possibly impact their function in the bedroom. We won't keep this G-rated. Then they would take notice and take action. So pollution and toxic, exposures are impacting everything from fertility to functionality.
Yeah, it's totally true. Bruce, do you want to speak to that quickly?
Well, just to say that, that's the tip of the iceberg in some ways. We know that some of these exposures are related to cancer. Some of these exposures are related to infertility. And we can go on and on. The question is, do we want to continue to rely on these ever increasingly expensive drugs to solve these problems? Or do we want to focus on prevention? And that's not even an option that people have been offered. I couldn't find any surveys that asked about whether people prefer prevention over treatment. I did ask over 1,000.
Other than your survey that you did.
Right. Well, we've got another one coming along, but I did a hand-raising survey of pediatricians, over 1,000 pediatricians across North America. And I asked them whether they would vote to increase funding to enhance the cure for childhood leukemia. And the cure for childhood leukemia is arguably the poster child for finding a cure for cancer, or whether they would vote to increase funding to find ways to enhance prevention. So out of these 1,000 pediatricians across North America, only 5 of them voted to increase funding to enhance the cure. Virtually all of them said we want to focus more on prevention. But in the United States, only 1% of dollars dedicated to research for childhood cancer goes to prevention. My guess is parents would say the same thing, but nobody's asking them. And the way we invest our health dollars and the way we invest our research dollars suggests that prevention isn't even important.
Where it's actually everything.
Absolutely. In the short term, we have to rely on drugs, better chemicals used to treat diseases like cancer or lung disease. But in the long term, the absolute goal is to find ways to prevent the disease.
Powerful. Powerful. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up that we haven't covered?
I think that this process we've learned, and we started again focused on protecting our children from pesticides. And then when cities are successful and communities are successful in getting organic management, then we get follow-up phone calls. Well, what do we do about synthetic turf? What do we do about 5G? What do we do about asphalt plants hidden in nature preserves impacting children's air that they're breathing with benzene and hexavalent chromium. So understanding how our children are being exposed, we saw the need to come up with a draft example of legislation to give power back to the local elected officials to be able to follow through on the oath that they take. They take an oath to protect public health and safety, but through certain things, through like the FCC with 5G and preemption, they're not even able to do their job because a lot of that is stripped away from them at the state level. So to bring forward a Children's Environmental Bill of Rights to allow our elected officials to holistically protect our children is critically needed right now, because you go down and you get your organic policy and then you find out your city wants to install synthetic turf fields. It's like, no, we're not doing that. Like we're not at a time where we can afford, we want to enjoy our families. We want to enjoy the time we have and work on building health and just not spend our time working on fighting every toxin and delivery system of harm one at a time. We don't need an organically maintained park and then have them put in a cell phone tower. They're just replacing one delivery system of harm with another.
That's
so
right.
I think, again, the focus needs to be, if we get it right for the children, we get it right for everything else.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. And how do we engage in the environmental Bill of Rights for our children?
Local, just at your municipal level, reach out to your elected officials and just start the conversation, and share the information and share what a beautiful, positive platform it is. Who doesn't want to go and protect children? Like, who would not be proud to put that feather in their cap?
Yep, I agree, 100%.
Getting them info.
And that will ultimately make its way up to be integrated into our national constitutions. There's over 100 countries that have a right to a healthy environment built into their constitutions, not in the United States, not in Canada, but
not yet.
There is at the municipal, not yet, absolutely. And Kim's not going to let us get away with it. So ultimately that will have an impact. Until then, one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is to see people like Kim who had a concern, she took it, and her and her group have helped to create this ripple effect that's really changing the world.
Yeah, it's really powerful, Kim. It's really, really powerful what you're doing. So thank you so, so much for your work, for your agency, for your advocacy, for the tools and resources that you and your team have put together. And Bruce, thank you so much for being a voice for people like Kim and myself, and for humanity, really, for our children, and helping us connect the dots, right? Because a lot of it is about connecting the dots and having a deeper understanding. And I'm really excited to share your story. And I'm also, one last thing is, I'm wondering how we can best support you and this movement.
Just, come to us and we'll help you in any way we can, because the ultimate goal is just to make it to where, as a parent, as a pet owner, you're not concerned about these things. So you can donate to us. Stonyfield Organics is actually the only partner we have that is allowing us to travel and work with cities to make this change. But you can help us. I think we need to get Bruce an award. He's so modest, and anytime we have a win, anytime we do anything, I always try and thank him and have him understand that without his support, we would not have gotten anywhere. And he's so modest. It's frustrating.
Well, but it's just like the ecosystem. If it was only scientists, we wouldn't make a difference, right? So it's all of the different elements that come together. And ultimately it's about communities. It's about groups like Kim that take the science and help provide the solutions. But science by itself, unfortunately, it's not enough. We need communities, we need mothers, we need parents working together to get us where we want to go. And we'll get there.
And Heart and Soil magazine. I mean, it's so, no, I'm serious. It's so positive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Conversation, like they're educating. That educational piece of this puzzle is critically important. Without that, and were in DC lobbying against some environmental writers in the Farm Bill, we were meeting with, you know, all the big ag guys. And I was just so fascinated with asking them questions like, do you guys discuss no-till? Do you guys discuss, you know, regenerative ag? And they said, the meeting, he said, turn around. So I turned around. There's a trade publication where he said every single advertisement had something to do with soil health. It linked back to no-till. It linked back to, so there is such a positive shift that we just have to just keep pushing it forward.
Yes, yes. It feels like there is an awakening happening, and there is more conversation happening. And it's people like you, Bruce, who have your feet on the ground, who have been in this knowing and in this space. And literally, like, I talked to my dad would say, there's already other people doing and saying what I've been doing. I don't need to share my voice, even though he really wants to. And I said, yeah, but Dad, it's because of light workers like you, and light workers like you, Bruce, who have been forging the way for people like myself and like Kim, and for all these other people who are stepping into more roles of leadership in this community to share the message. And if we didn't have the work that you have done, then we wouldn't have any foundation to stand on. So I deeply thank you and applaud you. And my heart is blooming with appreciation. So thank you.
Well, certainly your dad and mother and families that have, forged organic farming over the years have had a big impact. When my dad, who started out as a plant scientist, who used herbicides and chemicals to control nature in the 60s, by the time of his death, he was an organic farmer himself. And he became an earth elder at age 70 because he had the time he could devote back to focus on things like this. So there is a real important place for elders in all of this.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. Well, big love to the both of you. Everyone go check out nontoxicneighborhoods.org. It's the place to start for resources. You can also reach out to myself at Heart and Soul Magazine, and just start asking questions, have the conversations, notice what you are doing, and notice what you can do differently. It's not about making anyone right or wrong. It's just taking agency in creating a really healthy environment for our children to grow up in. Big love, and you guys make yourself an amazing day.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Grateful you joined us for that conversation and interview. If you haven't subscribed to Heart and Soil Magazine yet, head over to heartandsoilmagazine.com, click on that subscribe button, and join us for just $39.99 a year. You make yourself an amazing day, and I'm really grateful you're part of our community.